Well, we have Phil Beisel back again, and
Mm.
today Phil is going to explain to us why it is unlikely that human drivers will ever be going 200 miles an hour on a regular basis. Is that right, Phil? Is that,
Except some of us, right?
that's a few
A
folks?
few, a few on close roads.
Well, Phil also likes me to put up this card. Let's see how good I am at putting up this card. It'll be awful. Let's see, did it work, Phil? Is the card showing, Phil?
Pretty good, yeah. They got a lot of extra chrome at the top, but
Well, okay, but is everything there? All right.
yeah, it's good
For you
enough.
folks that are trying to find Phil, that's how you find Phil. Take your picture now or forever it's going to
Yeah,
go.
the point is to read my stuff. Don't listen to what I say. I'm more articulate in my writing.
Well, I don't know about that. I do know, Phil, that you write long. And so some people don't like to read
I
long,
know, I know.
write long too. And people don't, I sell a few books every month, but you'd think people would be buying them by the thousands. But in particular, you know who doesn't read long? Men. Do you know
Yeah.
who watches my station, my program? 95% men. So
I thought you were gonna say stupid people, but that might insult a bunch of people. No, I mean it's shocking how many people ask me questions about the very thing that's right in the article.
of course,
Like paragraph two says,
yep.
okay, you didn't read it. I mean, it's okay, but I mean, there's useful stuff in there. And then some people read it and they go, I can't believe it. I read this. It's amazing. Like I learned something for the first time about X or Y. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
When I started my marketing consulting business almost 20 years ago now, but I guess 18 years ago, one of the very first things I realized was that I could, one of the thing, my advantage really over other marketing companies was the multiple use of the same content. So I'd create one piece of content, but then I'd
Hmm.
use it as a video, as a written thing on a website, as a written thing in a blog post, as something on Facebook. And of course, in every single case, that same content would have to be rejiggered. And sometimes it was shorter, one paragraph, sometimes it was just a headline.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, of course, then Twitter came along and really brought it down to the 144 words or whatever it was when it first started. So yeah, it's an interesting world, but that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today is perception and the ordering, the human brain. I know you said this is not interesting to you. I mean, it's interesting to you, but not an area of your expertise. But the human brain is always making decisions about its preferences. We are stacking our preferences,
Correct. Yeah.
and we do, as my wife likes to say about me, she says, Randy, you always do exactly what you want to do. But she's really talking to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
We always do exactly what we want to do based on our preferences. And interestingly, it's kind of the same way with a full stack FSD neural net. And so this is the segue into what we want to talk about today because you just wrote an article and you kind of called it that you're pulling together the loose ends as we're
Yeah.
only 60 days away from launching in Austin. What needs to be done? What will the future look like? What are some of the things that nobody's thinking about with regard to what this final product will look like? Well, it's final product. It's not really final.
Yeah. Right.
The product that is unsupervised driving as well as robotaxi ride-hail service. So take us,
Yeah.
give us a starting point.
Well, I mean, where we stand is that a lot of the measure of success for a lot for FSD is how safe relative to a human is, and that's an extremely fair measure, no doubt. But what we will do as humans is we'll accept that technology into our lives if it drives us in a fluid way. Not necessarily like a bad human, but like a good human driver. And that relates to, there's a lot of nuance. There's a long tail, I think. And one of the things that I write about in this article, this is like the part three of my series on FSD, is I talk about user preference. And I think that we don't think enough of how much we are guiding our driving decisions by our own preferences. You and I were talking a moment ago about, one preference might be, okay, here's a shopping center we go into frequently. We always pick a certain entrance because we know from our perspective that it gets us closest maybe to the store that we enter, or it's the least trafficked, or for some other reason, maybe, whatever it might be. And for FSD to be successful for that individual, you would say, through say a voice interface with a product, don't take this entrance, go to the next entrance. Um, and you would expect the car to say something to you, something to the effect of, do you want me to do this at all future times? And you say yes. And so it's now marked as a preference, and
Now,
those things,
Phil, I just want to interrupt
yeah,
you because, I expect this to be Grok that we're talking about.
yes, yeah, well, it would be.
So I would expect Grok to say, "Are you sure? Now, come on, this entrance has this benefit." Anyway, that's just
Yeah,
my.
well, at the okay, let's back up a step. On So Tesla will very likely license the XAI product that we know as Grok, for voice recognition, voice recognition, um, the text prompt interpretation, and then um, speaking back to you. The car will speak to you, right? So an interaction might be something to the effect, and the reason why we want Grok in the car, um, is that a lot of the decisions that you make in the car are fast decisions.
Mhm.
About, you think about it, it's like, you come up, let's say the car's driving you FSD, it's either your car or you're in Robotaxi, right? And you come up to a light and you say, "Don't go right here, go straight." That's, to manipulate a interface in the car, with a touch, would be very cumbersome to
Mhm.
do that. But to speak to the car, and it may say, "Great, I'll do that." So maybe you either go right, you go straight, um, and then it would be probably conditioned to ask you, "Do you want me to do this?" Like maybe it would notice that you've done this 10 times, or maybe it would just say on the very first time, "Do you want me to remember that you always want to go right?" And you could say yes, and so now you've got two things going on. You've got the car as, it's got a voice interface that's, very low latency to get the car to do what you want it to do. And because those decision times are real short most of the time, like you're on a highway, you try to, take Waze or Apple Maps or something, and reroute because you see some traffic ahead. You know how difficult and cumbersome that is, through the interface, especially if you're trying to drive at the same time.
Sure.
So a voice interface is so awesome for that. Um, and then there's this idea of holding your preferences,
Mhm.
in FSD, and as we were talking earlier, those preferences wouldn't be really stored with the car; they'd be stored with your profile, you, Randy, me, Phil, and kept in the Tesla cloud, so that they would be transferable to every experience, especially when we have Robotaxi, because when you get in a Robotaxi, likely to have the same preference set as if your own vehicle, and you may never own a Tesla, it may be only Robotaxi, so that would apply as well. Um, the interesting thing about, uh, the idea of user preferences is that, like, how would they operate, right? In the sense of, an AI, and, what people probably aren't aware is that, we talk a little bit about the fact that Tesla trains a model for FSD. If you go back and read my article too, that goes very deep into what that is and what's in that model. But suffice it to say, for this conversation, it's a magic box of numbers. It's a lot of numbers. It's just like 1.5 billion parameters in version 13. But once that's transferred to the car, and that's what happens, it's trained in the cloud. And once it goes to the car, it's read only. And so there is no change to the model in the car. So, what you're you're not teaching the car anything. The car has one aggregate set of knowledge. It applies it to every, um, car equally. Obviously, it's circumstantial. It's extremely circumstantial. One roadway with a car parked on the side is different than the same roadway without the car. And so people perceive that, oh, it operated differently this time, but it's because something else is changing the environment around it, right? So now imagine that you do have this read-only model in the car. How do you layer in a whole set of preferences?
Mhm.
And one of my favorite examples is the gated community problem, right? So um, I live in South San Jose, and I live in a gated community, and there's a the gate has a resident entrance on the right. It's automatically license plate red, and on the left, it's check in as a guest, with a guard, a human. Um, and because I'm a resident, I would go to the right. The car can't know this. So when the car on FSD, my drive to my home always terminates at the gate because it drives straight down the center and doesn't know what to do. And then what happens as it drives down the center is the left gate opens, but the car really can't go through because the right gate opens, the left gate's still down. So it didn't know to move to the right. But what I could do is I could take control of the car like I always do. I always have to create an intervention at that moment, and as I start to drive down that lane, the car could prompt me through a Grock interface and say, "Do you always want me to use the right lane?" And I might say, "Yes, I'm a resident. Please use the right lane and come to a stop at the gate." And do you want me to remember this?
Mhm.
And then the car would do that. Now, what's happening here? For those wanting to understand how it's actually doing that, is it's very likely creating this sort of preference. Maybe you would call it a geofence, like something that's in your preference or outside your preference. Like an example would be, don't go down this street. That might be at the navigation level, but if we're talking about how would it modify the AI, um, it's sort of how it works when you're interacting with ChatGPT or Grok, right? These are known as LLMs, and people may have heard this term. They have a context window, and the context window is basically the short-term memory of the LM. I mean, they can make this a long-term memory if they want, but principally it's a short-term memory, meaning that while you're chatting with it about a subject, it is kind of replaying the context of your chat through the prompt each time. So each time you say, you keep adding more specificity to your questions about something, it's taking your previous conversation and it's pushing it back through. You don't see that, but it's what's actually happening. And so, in other words, the some computer in the cloud that is doing the inference for that prompt has no memory. It's just getting that entire. It's like being fed the memory, and so that's typically called context, and in neural nets. And so the same thing could be done with Tesla FSD, in that what it will do is it'll hold a whole set of preferences in a context, and it'll probably write them to the flash of the car, or keep them with your user profiles we were talking earlier. And so in other words, when you get in the car, it recognizes it's Phil. Okay, great. It activates my user profile, which means basically loads that into some memory. And now some of that ends up in the context for the AI. And so as it's doing this inference process, and remember, that's a very high frequency event, 15, 30 times a second. It's running inference for the perception and planning side of full self-driving. It will also run through that context. So that context will say, okay, I assert that there are 10 geofenced areas that this user wants to exclude from driving, you know, um, or, and then there's these other preferences, whatever they might be. So uh, that's an exciting way that you'll see Tesla kind of get to that point where we start to see the vehicle as the fluid driver, making those little micro decisions that we make, holding the nuanced preferences that we probably don't think about we're making, but we do it.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, the car will have to ask you things. It can't know what you're thinking, but it
Right.
can, but you can redirect it. And when you do, it can note that it's been redirected off of its normal path, and it can always ask you, is this something that you want to do frequently?
Yeah,
So,
and this kind of also speaks to something that I can remember well over a year ago was quite the topic of conversation, which was, what happens if the car gets into trouble? And we know that, of course, Waymo and some of these other
mm,
brands get into trouble. They get
right.
into a situation they can't get out of because of construction or because of emergency vehicles or a flat tire or all kinds of things. But once you add Grok, all of a sudden you have an entirely different level of you don't need, we talked about having maybe a little steering wheel on the screen you
No.
could manipulate, or a joystick in the car that you could
Yeah.
you fall back on. But once you have Grok in the car, pretty much now, hey, this rain is just too much for me. I'm uncomfortable. Please pull over to the side. Even though the car might feel like it can manage that rainstorm or that what other kind of weather it might be dealing with, the customer might say no.
Yeah.
It's just too rough for me. So all kinds of things kind of fall away as we get Grok in there.
Yeah, I think it's much like talking to your Uber driver. Sometimes you don't, but sometimes when you want to speak up, I mean, sometimes you want to just have a conversation. But when it's talking about the event of the driving itself, you might say, Don't head that way," or "Don't drop me off at this side of the hotel," or I don't want to go to Terminal B. I want to go to Terminal A, even though, whatever. Um, and what's important, one of the primary things I said a moment ago was that type of interface is a very low latency to response, right? You can literally tell the thing, like, as it's coming up to the light, "Don't go right here," right? It's a very immediate thing, and you couldn't do that easily through an interface. It would be very cumbersome. So we it's really sort of ironic in a way. Here we have an AI that's a neural net that will run full self-driving, but we have also arrived at a moment where we have an AI that is a neural net that can work with natural language.
Yeah.
I mean, it's it's
Yeah.
it's um it's a very good coincident time, right?
This
To
is
to pull these two products together in one kind of user experience. So yeah, I expect that.
I wanted to go back to something you said a minute ago because I think we ran over it too fast. So, in watching tons and tons of YouTube videos over time, there's always this idea, which those of us who are not clever with regard to neural nets and whatnot, we go, well, you know, I the car didn't do this treat very well, so I'm going to go back around a second time. And well, the car handled it better this time. It
Yeah,
seemed to have learned something. It seems to have gotten a better response this time. Let me go around again and test it again.
right.
And I saw sometimes, some of these individuals that were doing the YouTube videos would go through the same intersection or handle the same, I think there was train tracks and whatnot, and go back over and over and over again,
Right.
thinking that the machine was somehow either learning or
Yeah.
what percentage of the time was it doing well. And I suggested to you a minute ago, well, you're saying that no, nothing has changed. It's all hardwired. And I said, so in other words, even the butterfly effect might be in that if I go down that same street and
Yeah.
one additional butterfly happens to be in the way of my view of my camera, or some bug gets on the camera, or just as you said, I think a parked car that wasn't there last time,
Yeah.
et cetera, that those are the reasons why the car is acting differently.
Well, I mean, it comes down to a couple simple ideas here. Basically, the way neural nets are built is it's very asymmetric, right? They're built in the cloud through this process called training. And that runs, in the case of FSD, it's running billions of driving scenarios through um, hundreds of thousands of GPUs to come up with one set of numbers. And these are the parameters of the network. Um, so this neural network consists of, it's a little complicated to kind of say out loud, but it consists of these things called hidden layers. Don't need to, get into the details. And the hidden layers are connected. The hidden layers have these little things that we call neurons or nodes, and they're connected through things called weights, and they have these other values called biases. And so when you extract, so you have the architectural idea, how many hidden layers, how many nodes, and then you have these numbers that are imprinted by the training process. And those are what we call parameters, the weights and the biases of the network. And that's the thing that carries to the car. But once it gets to the car, it's read only, like it doesn't change. So it doesn't learn on the car. It has learned. It has learned from billions of driving scenarios. And now what it's going to do on the car is it's going to work with unseen driving scenarios, right? You're driving, our driving. So there are two parts of that sort of stack. There's the perception side and the planning side. What we're talking about here is why it behaves differently is the perception side. Perception is seeing every moving and non-moving object in its scene, in its point of view. And that's happening quite frequently. Like I said, 15, 30 times a second. It's building up these objects. Okay. And what it's doing is it's saying, I see a pedestrian, it labels the pedestrian as a pedestrian. It gives it some identifier, it's temporal, but it's giving it some identifier. So it's going to keep that through each iteration of its inference. And it's going to say, well, where is it positionally in my grid? Probably a GPS, like kind of a lat long position. Where is it positionally relative to maybe me or just an absolute value? Where's it headed? What is its velocity? And what's its vector? What's its heading and its velocity? And maybe then what is its intent? The idea is to kind of prejudge what the action of that pedestrian is. For example, if a pedestrian is kind of standing on the corner, there may be something that the inference, the perception side is saying that they're just stationary. They're not actually moving, and the intent is not they're not moving. They're just standing there. But then there may be some other activity that indicates that they're about to enter the intersection, right? Which would enter the path of the car. So all that said, of all those things that you can imagine coming through an intersection, there are probably a couple hundred objects that are in that field of perception, right? The static and the dynamic things that are moving, things that are not moving. So if any one of those changes, the decision is going to possibly be different through that process. So that is what people see when they see some change occurred for them. I go up the street every time, it seems to do the same thing, but now there's a parked car. And their observation was, it learned to go towards the center of the lane. It was hugging the right side. Well, no, it did that because having gone down the right side, there'd be a car in its path, and it decided to come more towards center. Now, that isn't to say, as we discussed a moment ago, that you won't be able to augment that through this context window, right, of data. But through that augmentation, we're still not changing the model.
Right.
We're still using the same model. We're just feeding it with different input values.
Sure.
And some of those input values are our context, our preferences, our ideas of what we want it to do. And so it can use that as part of its decision framework. It's very hard to train the model dynamically on the car. There are reasons for that.
Yeah, you don't want it to.
Actually, that's a very important part of it, is that all of a sudden they've certified this stack for a certain, you guarantee that Tesla has a very large simulator where they can drive, before they release a model, they know how it works.
Right.
And people don't see that. They think, it gets out in the wild and,
Yeah.
But the truth is, when they're validating the model, they have a couple billion samples, and they have this very dynamic simulator which can change the environments, and they can test different scenarios, and they can add to that testing. Each and every version, they can add more scenarios, and then they can, prove to themselves that they're either got a better safety score or some other scoring. They've got some probably scoring system, and in addition to that, they can try to determine whether they have failures of old scenarios, which in computer science called regressions,
Sure.
things that and so that's a way that they can if they come up with, let's say they've got a 13.2.7 and they come up with 13.2.8 model and they run it through the system, and it handles a certain set of scenarios very, very well, but then there's some new scenario or some previous scenario it fails on, and they pick that up in their testing. What they can do is that they can fine tune the model. They can retrain it with some of those scenarios and maybe an expanded set of scenarios around that problem, and clean up that problem.
Right.
And then they can test the whole thing again and say, okay, did the new stuff work? And did I heal the regression? And if the answer is yes, eventually they roll it out to the car. So you could imagine a scenario where you might fine tune the model on the car. But here's the problem with that. There is no way for Tesla then to guarantee that it didn't F up something else,
Right.
right? Create
We've had
regression.
a major regression as a
Right.
result of fixing this little thing.
Exactly. And that is an extreme problem. And when you understand neural nets, you realize that if a couple parameters change, the flow of data and the outcome can radically change. So they have to get a settled model,
Yeah.
and they can augment that dynamically through this context window. But to retrain the model locally, kind of unlikely.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
it sounds as if it would be counter
yeah, counterproductive.
counterproductive. It sounds, I've
And
never thought of it that way before.
yeah,
I don't think other people, I think this is new. This could be the thumbnail.
well, it's yeah, I mean it's an obvious and non-obvious thing, I guess. It's hard to change the model locally and not possibly muck something up
Right.
pretty bad.
Yeah.
And even if you do, even if you extract that problem and say that's a non-problem for some reason, trying to merge how Randy trained the car versus Phil trained the car back into now a new global model is extraordinarily hard.
Yeah.
So, so right now, I mean, I can't say that there's some engineer at Tesla listening to me going, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but I think I do, and I would say that state of the art is to train the model in the cloud, bring a read-only model to the car, allow it to be augmented, your preferences, my preferences, through some context, not much different than how an LLM keeps the context of our conversation running through. So if you look at one of these neural net models for FSD, the principal input is camera data, right? So what they do is they have 8 cameras on the car. Every inference cycle, again, maybe 15 to 30 times a second, they gather up a series of frames per camera, maybe like 3 frames. Frames allow them to see the dynamic, the change, things moving in the field of view, and then they'll gather up, a certain horizontal, vertical resolution from the camera. They may dumb it down to something, and then they'll also have the RGB value. So they have this big input vector for the visual or camera data. They're also input like the IMU, the inertial management unit, so they know the car's roll, pitch, yaw, and velocity, acceleration.
Yeah.
They'll also put in the GPS coordinates, where exactly the car is on the planet, latitude, longitude, altitude. They'll put in some state data, vehicle state data, and that's to potentially smooth, kind of integrate the flow over time. In other words, they don't want to go from hard braking to hard acceleration. They've got to smooth smooth it out. They'll also put in audio data because the stack is now going to listen for emergency sirens, um, and then lastly they'll put in a context window,
Mhm.
and that is, some things in that context window will just sort of be fixed by the system, like the ambient light. How light is it at this moment? What is the hour of the day?
Right.
Is it raining? Is it foggy? If they detect these, and but then they'll put your user preferences in that context window as well. So they may like say, okay, I'm in this quadrant. In this quadrant, this user Randy has geofenced off these various areas. Like you might be, let's say you're in a robotaxi, you're third and market in San Francisco, and you don't like what you see. Like this area looks sketch to you. So you say to your robotaxi, don't go down market around third and fifth
Right.
ever again.
Yes.
And that's going to keep that, and that'll build some dynamic geofence,
Mhm.
and then it will hold that geofence in your user preferences,
Right.
and then it will replay that every time, your user preferences, like I was saying earlier, will get loaded whenever you take a different robotaxi, even your own car,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it will load that and stuff that into that context window, and the AI will then use that to manage its planning.
Well, that brings up a whole nother subject that I've been talking about for a very, very long time, which most people thought, no, Randy, this would not be the way that Elon Musk normally does things. He'll want it to be perfect. And the idea there was that the car, when it first comes out, or even over years, would have some geofenced aspects built in. And these might be in the preference when, as you're talking about, or it might be in the stack or in the chip. Um, but so for instance, let's say that there's I know in Hawaii, on the island of Maui, rental cars are not allowed to take the back way to Haleakala. You can go the old rugged road, if you will,
Mm, right,
to the seven pools, but
right,
you can't just keep going around the island and come back to 𝐒𝐻𝐦. And so that's geofenced out. Well, you can, there's nothing to keep you from,
right,
but the rental car says you're not covered if you're going to take that back route coming.
right.
Well, it seems like that Tesla could do that for lots of things.
Yeah,
They could say if there's
sure.
this much standing water, if there's these particular roads, they're geofenced out for robotaxi, et cetera, et cetera. And
Yeah,
then once again, you might be able to preferentially override those.
right. Yes, I think it goes both ways. You can geofence in, geofence out
Right.
areas. But there's another article I wrote on, it's called the Robotaxi Drive-By, and talks a lot about some of the ideas of what may happen with robotaxi. And one of those is dynamic geofencing,
Mm.
and this very idea that um, robotaxi can exclude certain areas of a city very dynamically, like hour to hour,
Right.
based on changing conditions,
Right.
based on the fleet ahead of it, seeing the condition.
Right.
So, for example, maybe the route by nav is to always go down this particular road to get from A to B, and the user unsuspectingly is just wants to get from A to B, and but what he doesn't know is that the Capitol Center is outflowing 20,000 people after a game.
Right.
Um, Capitol Center, the Warriors or something. Um, and so the idea is that that could be a dynamically injected geofence, and basically say, don't go down this roadway. Come back three roads.
Right.
That's the best. That's the best dynamic route.
Mhm.
It could also, I mean, kind of crazy as it sounds, but remember earlier in our discussion we were talking about giving the intent of a pedestrian. We look at a pedestrian, we can kind of infer intent. Believe me, that can go very, very deep to the point where we might even be able to profile not not on an individual basis, but kind of just an aggregation of the environment,
Right.
be able to profile the kind of individuals in a street area
Mhm. Mhm.
and get a sense of like, oh, this is an unsafe,
Mhm.
it's a building protest. There's a protest about to occur, or there's crime, sort of gang related something going on, or there's drug dealing, or
Mhm.
something that's happening that is different than Tuesday. It's a Wednesday at 3 p.m. It's different, right? And therefore, through observation of the fleet, you could dynamically geofence off that area. And so might that go through the context window as I described before? Yeah, it might. It might be a higher level order bit, if you will, go through the navigation system in general. Like the navigation system is informing the FSD what sort of global route to take for its plan, right? Um, so yeah, you can imagine circumstances like that. And what it does is it cleans up the whole problem of you have safer rides for individuals, you have faster rides, especially in these immediately congested areas of the city. Um, and I think that will happen. I don't think it'll happen on day one.
Mhm.
But remember, they have the sort of the raw material to do this, right? I mean, the cars are on the network. They can communicate to the cloud. They can pass up any information they want to the cloud. The cloud can build taking data off the cars can build these geofences, exclusion zones, inclusion zones, whatever we were talking.
Sure.
Um, then you can also override those. For
Mhm.
example, if it said the car might say to you, "Oh, I'm not going to take Third Street.
Jammed.
It's jammed," and you might say to it, "No, no, no, please do that. I want to go down Third Street anyway."
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, because you know something, or maybe you're just going to exit the ride halfway. Your intention was different anyway. So so you could override those kind of preferences, perhaps. Maybe in some instances you can't.
Mhm.
But I think the theme here, as you go up a couple layers, is that the theme here is that the experience when we want the car to at first drive as good as a human,
Mhm.
which means as safe as a human. Now, that's quite suspect anyway, because humans really aren't very safe drivers, but we think we are. And we also think we're good drivers. We're also not very good drivers in terms of our perception of the environment is slow, et cetera. Um,
Is why we can't drive at 200 miles an hour.
exactly. We can't drive at 200 miles an hour. I mean, some people can. Um,
Highly trained,
yeah, they're usually
athletic.
sitting NASCAR, Formula One, but um, yeah, our perception time is too slow, and we build roads and we build road curvatures. There's the physics of the car, what a car can do with four wheels and this kind of spacing and so forth in terms of how it can stay on a roadway. We all know that. Some people don't when they drive the cars liberally off the road for some reason. But uh, further than that is beyond the physics of the roadway. We also develop the roadway based on how the humans have perceived. So future states of that could be like maybe HOV lanes are converted to autonomy lanes, and they function more like Autobahn, where the cars can go 150 miles an hour because there's no reason they shouldn't, and they can travel at 2 feet of separation
Right.
at 150 miles an hour because there's no reason they shouldn't. The only reason that they shouldn't at that point is whether the human in the car is uncomfortable because. But think about a future state here is that when humans don't think of themselves as the first order drivers, and then we take rides in autonomous vehicles, that's going to swap. We're going to most our kids literally will not be thinking about driving. They'll be thinking about riding, and therefore, what they think a car does. I mean, people get in trains all the time. Trains go 200 miles an hour or whatever. Maybe not in this country, but uh, maybe not on Amtrak. But um,
But there
but
are bullet trains in
there
China.
are bullet trains.
Been on them in Japan.
Yep, yep. So, but I mean, people don't give it two thoughts, right? They're in this thing. It's going fast. They're sitting there drinking coffee.
Yep.
So, um, so that type of thing is that the theme here is that we want to get to a point where we feel it's safe and we feel it's fluid and we feel it um, deals with our preferences
Oh,
in a way that, kind of respects our humanness. How I think when I've queried people about like, would you ever want a car to drive you? And it's funny when I talk to some folks, their response is, no, I want control.
yeah,
Like it's not just safety.
yeah,
So no, I can't. No, I want control. Well, where do you lack control in a system that is highly responsive to you?
right.
You
Yeah,
don't. You
yeah,
don't. I mean, why is a car highly responsive to you? Because you have your hands on, you have a low latency input to the controls, right? So if you think about what's going on with a car is for FSD and really humans, you have basically photon to control, right? So you're taking in light, eyes, or camera. Um, you're running it through this inference in our heads. It's our brains, our meat, uh, our meat muscle here. On a car, it's the inference computer, and then we're actuating controls. We're applying we're some kind of acceleration, braking, and steering angle are the three principal inputs of the car. Um, and so, I'm sorry, outputs that affect the controls. And so, if you look at FSD from one end to the other end, that latency, you can see light, you can gather data from the cameras, push it through inference, uh, get some change to controls 15 to 30 times a second, right? And that's with, say, hardware 4. Okay, so hardware 4 is rated at a certain amount of trillions of floating point operations per second, which is what makes it do its thing fast. And then hardware 5, which would be part of Robotaxi, at least Cybercab vehicles, is about order of magnitude faster, right? Or more processing, I should say. So therefore faster. Um, but a human is about roughly 10x slower in decision framework from us perceiving light, running it through our kind of visual cortex, transferring down to our motor skill area, out through the nerves to the hands to. So if you think about our user preferences are being controlled by our direct ability to control a steering wheel, to control accelerator pedal, control a brake. If you can say to a car, stop, and the car stops instantly, or close
right.
there too, then you've minimized that latency to control as quickly as as if you could with direct control of the driver controls.
Yeah,
So
so this whole thing, what we've basically just done, I don't know if it worked for all of you out there, but
I hope
I
so.
think what it did for me is it really increased my belief that June is going to happen.
Yeah.
Between the impact of Grok, taking into consideration the way that everything is working, even now, the ability to geofence off the things that either I don't want to do or that Tesla tells the car, you can't go here, you can't go there,
Yeah.
or you can't go under these kind of circumstances. Seems to me that based on that, plus as Phil pointed out in the very beginning, I've got the experience, Phil's got the experience of driving the car around right now, knowing that 99 point whatever percent of the time it's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And most of the wrong things that I've run into lately have been things that were so easily correctable, like not being able to get into traffic on an on-ramp. And all it was going to do was get off at the next off ramp and get back on at the next on ramp,
All right.
which in this case would have only taken an extra 2 minutes. And it probably knew that. Rather than trying to jam itself into traffic, it was like, no, this was probably the better thing to do is to get off and get back on. So many of the things that I've seen that it's done wrong lately have maybe not been wrong. They have been
Well,
the safer way to go, or ultimately maybe sometimes the faster way, even though I didn't know it.
yeah. Remember, version 13 came out, I think, late last year, if I'm got my calendar right. And we've kind of persisted with various releases of that up to, I think we're 13.2.8 now or something. Um, and Tesla's been quiet. And I guarantee that quiet doesn't mean lack of energy. And so I suspect that Robotaxi is built on a version 14 model, which would be probably a higher parameter count model, and that they've already tested this through their simulator, through their testing system. They probably understand its safety values
100%.
versus a 13.2.8. They have that data. They've been running it themselves for a while. What I do think is that we will, two themes here. One is, will we get to a place that I call FSD convergence? Convergence means we converge on something that is autonomous driving, the complete thing. And I say yes. There are folks out there that will tell us forevermore we'll never get there until we add LiDAR or something. And I disagree. I disagree. And some of that I disagree based on my own technical knowledge, and some of it based on my empirical use of. I've probably driven about 4,000 miles on my Tesla on FSD. So I know it's little nitty. I know the nuance. I know what's real there and what's not. But I think June is an interesting marker here, because when we come to a trial in Austin, uh, we don't have to have everything. I mean, that's the thing that everybody thinks, that we're going to solve a lot of the long tail stuff. Maybe Grock isn't even part of the experience at all in the beginning. I don't know. I don't know, and I don't think many people that don't work for Tesla know this answer. Um, but I think it's a trial, and the key points of success are: can it get you from A to B safely? It's not going to have abundance of immediacy of be there instantly, all this idea of supply in the market. That's not something that has to be part of that trial. It doesn't necessarily have to um, deal with a lot of these user preferences that we've been talking about. It can avoid many of these things. They may set up geofences so that, when you set up a destination, it'll say, sorry, at this time.
Yeah, go there.
Yeah. So, for example, imagine that somebody wants to take a robotaxi from downtown Austin to their house, which is in a gated community, and they have the same gate problem we talked about. The 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 beta can know, in the city of Austin, I've got a geofence around that entire, and say, I'm sorry, I can't take you there. Here's the nearest spot I can take you, or maybe just, I can't take you there. You figure out what the nearest spot is. So I suspect that the key concept of success here is, can you use the application to summon a ride, much like you do with an Uber? Can you take the ride safely from A to B,
Comfortably.
and comfortably, safely? And that should be really the marker for that trial. I think that's why they're calling it a trial. Will it rapidly expand to a general service? Of course, that's what we were hoping for. But the whole point of a trial is, I think that Tesla is very, very good at sort of like, maybe it's the mind of Elon that kind of informs this, is the idea of fail fast,
Mhm.
right? And I don't mean crash the car. I mean,
Right,
people
right.
will say, oh, well, yeah, it's crazy. No, I mean, the idea is that what you do is you test something in the real world, as opposed to holding it back and having sort of a academic or intellectual exercise about how it's supposed to work at the end state. And you test it in the real world, and you rinse, wash, repeat on it at a very, very high velocity. Um, I mean, it's kind of interesting because it's counter to, say, what Apple does culturally, right? From a product point of view, most of the products
Exactly.
that, yeah, Apple puts out a product that's like the finished product, right? It's theoretically, and if it gets it wrong, it's really scary for Apple, right? Like the Vision Pro, it's sort of like they got that thing right down to some level of nuance. They put it out there, and the market went, "Ugh." not really. And Apple's not used to that, right? Apple's always been used to taking a product, curating it down, crossing every T, dotting every I, and making them all look pretty and putting it out there and having the world go, that's just what I was waiting for, right? Um, Tesla's willing to be messier, right? It's willing to tell us that they're building Optimus and it's coming, and here's what it looks like in prototype form. They're willing to tell us that they're building FSD and let us trial it through many, many stages and let our feedback be kind of an extended engineering organization, right? To allow us to opine on what we think is good about the product and what's poor about the product and let them fix it. That opens them up to all the stuff that happens, the near-term criticism, and then all the armchair engineering that goes on and people telling them what they should be doing. And yet they plow through very, very rapidly. I think the key to that model is rapid iteration.
Yeah, that is definitely the style of Tesla.
Yep.
And Phil Beisel, once again, I think you've broken news here. I think you're going to change minds today. You're going to make people feel more comfortable with the process and what we're the exciting times that we're going to be enjoying in June. So thank you for coming on this morning, and glad to have you on. For all of you out there, as always, of course, it has been great talking to you.